Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We'd like to welcome you this morning to the ADOT DBE Task Force Workshops. So today we're excited because we're going to be doing some great things. Today we're going to be talking about implementing recent updates to the Davis-Bacon Act. So today I'm going to be introducing to you some of the people who are going to be involved this morning. And as a business owner, I know you're excited about this particular topic. Today, Cassandra Johnson with CLJ Construction Consulting, LLC, is going to take you into the meeting, and our facilitator today is going to be Patty Oles. So I am looking forward to hearing from both of them. So Cassandra, I hope you are strapped in and buckled up and ready to get us started. This morning, we've got about 24 people online already, so take her away.
Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, Angela. So I'm very appreciative that Cass let me crash her party here. And this has been a conversation that we've had a lot on some of the big projects that we're working on together. And I get to introduce my friend, Cassandra Johnson, and tell you why she's the right person to be able to give this information to you. Right now, you see us, we're at I-10 Broadway Curve, and we've worked together over the last few years on several large ADOT projects, but that's only my experience with Cass. Cass has worked in the construction industry for the last 35 years. You grew up in the business, right? I mean, been everything from contractor to consultant now, had worked for ADOT, but has been on all sides of the construction process and has followed the changes to Department of Labor rules and regulations, the processes that ADOT has in place to monitor those. So I can't think of a more perfect person to help subcontractors understand the recent updates that are coming out of Department of Labor on the Davis-Bacon and related acts. So let's get right to the point. There's been a couple of changes that have been happening. As a matter of fact, the new rules have gone into effect on October 23rd of this year. There are hundreds of pages that have been changed and modified and codified for this process that's been in place for a very long time. So you probably have seen them. You've been invited to a lot of workshops recently, especially from ADOT, to cover what's happening with the new rules. It was a major focus of the DBE task force meeting where Stella Robinson made the presentations. There also have been some ADOT trainings, some Department of Labor trainings to get you up to speed. But what we've noticed is there definitely needed to be a contractor take on it, and especially for subcontractors that are working at ADOT. So Cass, from a contractor's perspective, can you summarize what you saw in the DBRA rule updates?
So thank you, Patty. In the DBARA rule updates, I had noticed that they did some updates on definitions, compliance principles, and enforcement of it. So it's putting a lot of what's already in practice, but putting it in writing so it's more black and white and you're seeing it. So one of the things is in definitions is seeing where the responsibility is lying. And, as a contractor, as a prime, I had, some subcontractors and stuff. And so having that opportunity to see that at the end of the day, when the subcontractors were having some things, then it was up to the prime to help. And so I've been on both sides and seeing that.
So some of that, for example, you're saying, do they codified or they put into writing what ADOT had already had in practice, right? So when we were looking at the new rules, you were like, but we're already doing this here and the agency's already enforcing it this way. So now they just change it for Department of Labor and all agencies the Department of Labor monitors. And then you were saying from the principles of enforcement from the prime contractor's role that it's always been implied that the prime contractor had responsibility for its subs, but this formalized it? Is that what you just said?
Yeah, this is formalizing it. It's putting in writing. And then it also went into more detail talking about the layer of subcontracting to where if the subcontractor has a subcontractor, so it's just the ball's rolling downhill and it's flowing down. So having that in writing, it has been industry practice about it. So, another thing that I was noticing is multiple counties of site work.
So that's like the I-17 job, right?
Yes, it's like the I-17. We have two counties. We We have Yavapai and Maricopa. So seeing that and knowing like the boundaries of where that is going to happen, this actually was able to address that and how the agency is going to be addressing it, how they can address the wage decisions going further.
And that would make sense because ADOT has a lot of miles that go through multiple counties, and sometimes the contract docs aren't very clear, but at least now there's direction, correct?
Yes, there's direction coming, yes.
I know that one of the big changes that we were still waiting to see how it's going to work was related to change orders or supplemental agreements. What did you see in there?
I saw that and talking about in regards to the change orders, and when I went to the DOL training, I was able to talk with Megan and get asked some questions about that, because that affects every single contractor and project in Arizona. If there's a significant change in change orders, that could potentially bring in a new wage decision that we're not used to seeing.
Right. So before, it used to be the wage decision was a part of the contract, and that stuck with you all the way through to finished. And now with this new change, we're having to see how it's going to impact what a substantial change is or a significant change. So that's definitely one of those areas to watch for. Another thing that we saw come up was the reasonableness of wage, application of wage decision. I think we were seeing, or we were interpreting it to have more agency application, like they can make some decisions now. Were you seeing the same thing?
I was seeing that, allowing ADOT to be the department or an agency to be able to, if a conformance request, for instance, is a comment that's going on most of the project, that they would be able to allow that to be part of the wage decision, to include that in it.
Well, so that's some practical stuff for sure. One of the things that I noticed, and kind of on a process change, were some additional documentation requirements, not documentation requirements, but record keeping requirements. So they've always had social security, address, name, but now what else did they add?
Now they're saying that you need to have the employee's phone number and email. So that has been a change. And some other documents already have it, but we haven't had to in the past put it in on our certified payrolls.
Right, and I think that's coming from following up on the interviews and other things to be able to contact the employee, so it's just that additional. One thing though it may lead into is, if we do have email addresses, is how those digital signatures will work. I know that's up in the air.
Oh yes, and that would be really nice to be able to look into those digital signatures.
So we talked about that a lot of that 100 pages, a lot of those changes were related to expanding the agency's role, right? And how they're addressing that, and addressing the reasonableness of wage decision, wage request. But let's talk about, I think I actually covered that already. So we talked about the new wage decision, in expanding in the conformance role, email addresses and phone numbers. I just wanted to assure everybody to know that a lot of the information that is collected via certified payroll and the reporting, we'll get into this, is kept confidential. So the employee information that you're supplying to the agencies is there for their record and verification, but it isn't shared necessarily in public requests and that kind of thing. So when you're asking for social security, email, address, that stays in the systems and it doesn't get disclosed. Just, we wanted to make sure that you were aware of that. We're waiting for clarification from Department of Labor and ADOT on a variety of things that are impacting contractors, especially how the new rules will be put into the system. But there are some key things that you should look for as a subcontractor when you're getting these contracts. So those new rules in place, when you're getting those contracts, when you're getting those invitations for bid from ADOT, there are some key things that you still should look for, things that haven't changed. And Cass, tell us what we're looking for in a contract doc.
So looking at the contract doc, we're going to try to, part of this whole session is being able to be cradle to the grave, starting before bid, seeing if the project is right for you, all the way to when you get awarded the project and you're finaling out the project. So one of the things that you want to do at the beginning, when you're looking to see if the scope of work is that you want to bid is your forte, is look at the contract documents. Make sure that you're understanding what's in the contract documents. And the 1273 is a big one. That's going to talk about your employee contractor compliance. And it lays out everything that is going to be required, you're also going to want to look at that wage decision and make sure that you know what city and county that you're in to be able to make sure that you got the right wage decision. Sometimes, you know, things happen, and I've had a project before that I was bidding that the wrong wage decision was in, and that was one of the questions that I had to do and before I could bid it, because if you don't have the right rates, then that's going to affect all your pricing.
So absolutely look at it before you even bid.
Yeah.
And if you don't see what you need in there, do you ask questions?
Yes, yeah, ask the questions. If you know, as a prime, I would go to the agency, but as a sub, reach out to the prime. That way that prime can get that information in.
So one of the things that's really important in looking at those documents is understanding that when you sign that contract, you're signing that you've read all of that. So we're giving you some highlights as to what's included in that. In the FHWA 1273, for example, it is all the federal regulations that get added to your contract. So not only is it standard terms and specifications that are in the contract, how you're going to bid it, but the other things that apply. So we're going to send out through Rebecca an at a glance. It's like 15 specific concepts that you need to understand about prevailing wage requirements, certified payroll reporting, and some of the rules that we're going to touch on today. But it gives you at one sheet, because that document is like 20 pages, one sheet to reference that, and it covers a lot of what we're talking about today. So we'll send that out. But one of the most important things that we want to make sure that you understand, and we make this conversation about wages and prevailing wages, we want to make sure you understand what it is and what it isn't. So prevailing wages and certified payroll in this context is for federally funded construction projects. So if you're on a professional services side and you hear certified payroll, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the wages and certified payroll as it relates to construction processes. So we're going to dive into one of the most important contract docs that come with that, and that's the wage decision. I'm actually going to ask Cass to walk us through it, because this is something that's very, very important to understand what you're looking at, how to read it, and some of the concepts that are there and what doesn't apply to you. So let's bring one of those up. We've got from the Cubit fan job, I-17. Their wage decision, so we can walk through that. That's pretty familiar with that one.
So like I said prior, on I-17, we have, we're working in 2 different counties. We're working in Yavapai and Maricopa. So when you're trying to, or when you're going to bid a job, the first thing I do, and when I was estimating as a contractor, is I'd come in, I would look to see which type of construction it is. On this one, it is a highway.
There we go.
All right, okay, so now I gotta take it. So, you know, here we have a highway wage decision. And then when you're looking at these wage decisions, I really like to go through it, because depending on if you're a union contractor versus a non-union contractor, you would go look in the wage decision to look back. So one of my little tricks of the trades that I tell subcontractors, if you're not union, go straight to the back page of the wage decision, and you're going to have survey rates.
I'm going to ask our assistant here to scale that down just a little bit so we can see more of the screen.
Yeah, so you're gonna go to go up a couple pages.
Like one, yeah, that would be good. So Cass is saying go to the very end of this.
Yeah, so if you go to page 4. Oh, 4, yeah. So when you're looking at, I just pulled that out of my.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at the wage decision, where it says SUAZ 2009, this is from our 2009 survey that we did here, that the agency did. And when you're looking at these are going to be all of the classifications that are listed under here from that survey that came from the different areas in the industry, and they did the average rates.
Mm-hmm. The prevailing wage, essentially.
Yes. So one of the things too to keep in mind when you're looking at this is when you're looking, we'll use iron worker. It says iron worker rebar. It's showing Pima County and Pinell County. Those rates are only good in those counties.
Okay, so we got to figure out that it applies to highway. We got to know where our work is. We're union or non-union rate, but we'll get back to that. So I don't want you to just stop right there. If you're a non-union contractor, flip to the back is what you're saying.
Yes.
Look for your classifications for your work and the locations, right?
Mhm.
What else?
And then, like under laborer, if it says, this one here says asphalt raker, there's no counties attached to this. This means that in this wage decision, asphalt raker prevailed. Doesn't matter if you're union, non-union, that you're prevailing.
Okay.
So this is where I would say to go look first, because this is where it's gonna tell you. When we talk union, if we go back up to page, let's try 2. Oh, 1, let's go to 1, let's go to operators. And scroll down. So when we're looking at a union, the union, when you're signatory to the union, you're already agreeing to pay a rate.
Right.
So,
Not all our contractors are signatory to the union, especially a lot of subs, right?
so that's why, looking at this. Now, if you go to that survey rate sheet that we just talked about, and you don't see the wages or the classification there, then this is where you're gonna go back. You're gonna go back to the unions, and you can see here where how it designates between carpenter 0 or 0408. This is carpenter's union here. They're showing here that the carpenter prevailed in these counties.
Okay, so gonna reframe it for you for somebody else who's looking at bidding documents, right? So wage decision, if you scroll it down just a minute so we can see more of the page. There's some header information that you want to be aware of. Is your geography, the very top, Kaylee, is your geography covered by that wage decision, right? Just real quick note, this is a highway contractor, but that paragraph underneath, we get that question a lot, doesn't apply to you. That only applies to direct federal agencies. This is a federally aided project and when we work at ADOT. So that note underneath you, and we get that question all the time, is for Davis-Bacon Act. So just mark that off. It doesn't apply to you. You're going to look for your classifications.
Yep.
First, if you're a non-union contractor, flip to the back. If you're a union contractor, you're already signatory to what your rates are going to be. Let's reframe that though, because it's something that's very important to note here is that these rates are the prevailing wage rates for every contractor working on the project, whether or not they're union or not union. And so for some contractors, these are going to be less than what they're already paying, correct?
Yep.
And for other contractors, it's going to be more than what they have normally paid. So these are like the minimum wage rates for each of these classifications. And so if you're a non-union contractor and your work is covered by one of these groups, for example, you're going to be paying at least that.
You're gonna have to pay, these are your minimum rates that you're gonna have to pay. So when you're doing that at the beginning of the job, this is what's really important about making sure that you find that wage decision when you're bidding work. Because as a small firm, and making sure that your unit prices are covering in this.
Right, and I think we're going to talk about bidding in the next thing. Some other things to point out in the on the wage decision. So as she said, right now we've got some dated wages. Some are union heavy. There's some other things that you need to consider. In some areas, the application of the rate also includes, actually almost in every area, includes the practice of that union. So if a union, for example, was found prevailing in that work, meaning that a good majority of the work that was done related to highway by the carpenters, they were a majority of the work, then they have been found to be prevailing. So it's going to include their practices as well. So in this case, it says cement form work. In different counties, they may not be found prevailing. So just because a classification is covered by the union in one county, for example, that may not be the same in some of the rural counties.
Correct.
You get a different wage and it'll be down on that survey page, right?
Yep. And we're fortunate that this wage decision that we're having on I-17 has a little bit more information on it. But if we have a Gila County wage decision, they don't hardly give you any kind of classification. So then you're gonna do a lot of conformance requests. And that's part of one of the things is if you're on this and you're looking at the wage decision and you don't see that your scope of work or your work classifications on there, that means that you're gonna have to conform it.
Okay, we actually have a sample of that too. So especially if you're in the rural counties and the smaller counties where it may not be covered, the conformance request is that other document. So you get to request the classification and wage rate for the work that you do. So I'm going to have this zoomed in just a little bit so we can make it smaller. Smaller. So for all of you watching on at home, this big screen in front of us. So
It's like sitting in the front row of the movie theater.
it is. But walk us through this, Cass. What are we doing? Who has to sign this? Who gets this? Is it a
Okay.
prime? Is it a sub?
Yes, so how the conformance request is going through, for this to be able to get submitted, and if you're a subcontractor and you want to add a conformance a classification, it needs to go through the prime. So when you're looking at, when we can just go down really quick, when you're looking at this form on page, or oops, go back up. Oh yeah, going up. So I am usually, one thing that's nice about ADOT, they have this through DocuSign.
Oh, so you just fill it out
We
electronically?
just fill it out electronically. You put in your name, your email, it will send you a little, open it up, you put the information in, and then it kicks it over for signature. So if a sub is filling it out, there is a link for a subcontractor. They go in, they're gonna fill out item 10, their name. They can put the project information in, they're gonna come in and put 12. Now, they might not have all of the information, but that's where the prime comes in and fills in any of the missing information.
Okay.
The important thing for a subcontractor to make sure that they have is their name and making sure the work classification's there. You have to include what craft it is, if it's a labor, operator, truck driver.
Mhm.
And then you're gonna wanna say what the work classification is, the description, and then you're gonna want to put in parentheses the duties.
Okay.
What are they doing?
So some key points here, right? She talked about class or work classifications, power equipment operator, trucker, laborer, those main trades, but then specific classification underneath it, like if it's a specific trade, the duties that get put on there, and then it gets filled out. Wages, tell me wages and fringe here. What do I fill out?
So when it comes to wages and fringe, you're gonna look at it. And how the DOL looks at it is they go and they'll see what kind of classification it falls in and what it's similar to, and they'll do an average prevailing rate to when you submit this for approval. So
Okay.
you're gonna wanna keep that kind of in mind. You have that wage decision, you see what is already there. So looking at, like, if you're using a labor, you need to add, a rock slinger laborer.
Mhm.
You can go in there and you're gonna do like a weighted average of what those laborers are making. So if you kind of get your idea around it, and one of the things that I would like to stress too is this is a first come first serve basis on projects. This isn't contractor specific. This is project specific.
Okay,
Yeah.
so let's recap some of that. So you have a wage decision that was in your contract documents. You want to look at the type of work that's on there, but if your classification isn't on there, you're looking what the pay range is for that type of worker. So labor, what the pay ranges are for laborers. You want a wage request that falls in that range, right? That's going to be reasonable to the work of laborers. Same with truckers, you would want something that is reasonable to the work of truckers that's already on the wage decision if you have a specific type of truck. Same with equipment operators, like, okay, equipment operators that operate something similar or of this size, this is their rate. So you would put that on there because it's not included. Very important thing that you said, first come, first serve, and project specific. So this isn't just the contractor that requested it. If they get labor rock slinger approved, it applies to anybody on the job who's got a labor rock slinger, right?
Yep. So over the years after our survey, we used to have traffic control technician in our wage decision. Every project has traffic control technician. So when the survey came out and we lost that work classification, we then had to conform on every single project. We have to submit a conformance request. Industry came together at least, and we're realizing that a lot of it fell under general labor.
Mhm.
So when you're filling out these conformance requests, we're able to say laborer, traffic technician, and then our wage rate that we used was as a general labor because we felt that that was the closest it was. And back in the day, when in the previous wage decision, general labor and traffic control technician fell under group 1 of the union.
Okay.
So you can go back and look and see kind of what the industry and the standards were back then.
Okay, so sometimes if there is a wage rate, but it's not classified or clarified for your worker, you can just ask for that clarification as laborer, traffic control technician, and you could use that same labor
Mhm.
rate? Okay, all right, that's good to know.
So, and it makes it easy because, you're already knowing that rate. And then if you have to conform something over, then at least you get familiar with what the industry is doing, and it helps the project.
Very cool. Okay, we'll stop sharing. That's a good thing that it's on DocuSign. So you fill it out online, you put the right people in there that have to sign it. It gets pushed all the way through. Love those electronic signatures. So very important, learning how to read a wage decision. If you're looking at your contract docs and it's not in there, knowing that you're gonna have to conform a classification and rate. So here's how we're gonna apply it during the bidding, right? So Cass outlined some very specific things. The 1273, the wage decision, the conformance request. She said, you've got to go in there and identify your classifications when you're bidding, right? Because this is going to be a part of your price. If you've got labor and material built into your price, you want to know what the minimum rates are that you have to pay for those classifications. You want to understand what's prevailing in terms of wages and practices. So if certain tasks are included in a classification already listed, then it's not going to be something that the agency is willing to conform. They're going to be like, no, that rolls into whatever, like, you know, that type of group. So you want to understand what that part is. We're going to talk a little bit about overtime, because if the overtime is the other component of this, right? You've got what you saw in the wage decision was base hourly rate and fringe. So two components of the wage rate. And I don't think we covered that, but then we have overtime. So let's cover what base, fringe, and overtime is.
Yes.
Before we move on.
Okay, so when you're looking at your rates, you had a column that said wage rate. That is your hourly rate. That is what they are saying to do. And then the next one said fringe. Well, fringe benefits is a rate that goes for, if you had health, like, it pays the employee fringe in cash for but they look at it as health, dental, like a benefit that would.
401k,
Mhm.
not taxes,
Not taxes.
not what we owe the IRS, not the social security component of our payroll, none of that. It's like actual fringe benefits.
Yes, and so, you know, you're like, hey, I'm gonna pay you $13 an hour, and on top of that, I'm gonna give you $5 in fringe to be able to do what you need to be able to have dental or whatever kind of benefit outside of.
Very cool. And it's got to be for the employee's benefit,
Benefit.
right?
Yep,
We had
it's
that
an
conversation
employee's.
before. That's an employee's benefit. If you're paying somebody to do something for you as the owner, that's not necessarily their
No,
fringe benefit.
it has to be on the benefit of the employee.
Okay,
It has to
So-
be a contribution, not a.
that's the word, contribution. Contribution towards a fringe benefit plan or to the employee's pocket to cover their own
We
benefits.
just found our word of the day.
Contribution, word of the day. So you can either contribute it to a plan and take credit for it that way. Or if you don't, if you're a smaller company that doesn't offer fringe benefits, or maybe you don't have enough fringe benefits to cover that part of the wage rate, then you would add that to the hourly rate paid to the employee. So we're gonna cover what that means. You would add, that's what she said,
Yes.
rate in lieu of cash, cash in lieu of fringe,
Fringe.
cash in lieu of fringe. So, all right, overtime.
Overtime. So one of the things is, a lot of times, a company will put the wage rate and the fringe together and then times that by 1.5 for overtime. You don't have to do that. Nope, you don't need to do that. You're only having to pay overtime on the hourly rate. The fringe is just straight time or just this straight rate for all hours worked.
So that's important, because if you're putting together a price, and especially if you're in a low bid price, some of the understanding is that you know how to apply the rate and fringe, right? So if you're thinking, and based on the schedule, that you're gonna be working Saturdays, you know, you're working 60 hours a week, you wanna make sure that your price covers what the overtime's gonna be. So that's, if it's $20 plus a $10 fringe, you want you want to account for what your time and a half is on that $20 plus that fringe. So there are gonna be some days where you're paying your worker 20 plus the 10 plus the 10.
Okay.
So equivalent of $40 an hour. So you want to understand how overtime is calculated so that you can put together a good price for your work. And that leads us to something that not all contractors are a max price or have a low bid item, right? Sometimes you put together a number, like some contractors, is the price for the bid for the work that you're going to do. Others actually have a rate that they're going to charge, and it still applies to them. Anybody who's doing work on a job site of a labor or mechanic form has to pay at least the prevailing wage rates. Now, if you're offering a service or a laborer or mechanic in some sort, an operator of some sort, and they have an hourly rate, let's say your truck driver, you know, you normally charge, I don't know, let's say $85 an hour. that has to include all of the components that we're talking about here. So you have to have a loaded rate, or you want to make sure it covers your loaded rate. Tell us about
Correct.
loaded rates.
So loaded rates are gonna be your direct labor costs. So basically, if, Patty, you were my truck driver and I went out, so when I'm bidding and trying to give an hourly trucking rate, I'm gonna look at how much do I have to pay Patty? What is her hourly rate and fringe included? And then I'm gonna also look at it and see what the burden is, and that burden is gonna be is the employer cost that's on top of that. And how you're gonna, what is at the end of the day, what is the full cost that it costs me to have Patty go run the truck? And then part of that, you're gonna have your overhead. You'll have your overhead rate of any of your, which your overhead ends up being utilities, your office
All the
rent,
company costs.
company's costs, and then profit. You want to make sure you get your profit on there. So
That's very important, because we actually have run into situations where contractors will call on different projects and they're like, we're running into a situation where our rate isn't covering enough of what we're paying our employees. The project is requiring that we're working 60 hours a week, and they didn't account for the overhead, or not just the overhead, but the overtime that was going to be paid to those workers, regardless of what the rate was. So if you're one of those contractors that has a unit price rate, you want to make sure that you have a good estimate of any overtime work that you're expecting on the schedule and build that into your unit cost. If you have a situation there, definitely talk to your prime contractor on that, whether or not it was included. We all see the contract docs, but like I said in the beginning, they assume that you've read them.
Yeah.
Right? They assume that you're giving a number based on understanding and reading all of these requirements. So they're assuming, your prime is going to assume that you've read the wage decision, that you know your business well enough to estimate whether there's overtime that's going to be required to meet the schedule. And hopefully you've put something like that into your pricing. But prevailing wages are an important thing to consider when you're bidding, and to know what your loaded rates are going to be.
one thing I was thinking about too in bidding is sometimes, you might have a fast track project. You need to know that, so that the contracts itself, or the specifications, give you like a date and like how long, if it's 120 days, or how long the time frame is for that project. If you see that you're getting a project that might be, or even we'll talk about fast track, you might want to just verify, you're gonna want to verify with the client that it is overtime. Do you see overtime gonna be happening in here? So,
Okay. If I have subs, all of this applies to them too, right? I have to
Yes.
make sure that all the documents we just talked about flow down to them. So if I've got a sub, they've got to understand that this applies. Tell me what you run into with subcontractors.
so with subcontractors and having that is making sure that as a prime, I made everything flowed down to my subs. And then, especially in these mega projects, we're getting down to levels, the 4th tier and 5th tier subcontractors. So it's kind of hurting like chickens, trying to get all that information in the
Right.
contract and
Because it
making sure
applies
they
all the way down.
it applies. And now they put it in writing that its sub is responsible for its subs, and the prime's responsible for its prime,
All
for
the way
its sub.
That's called the flow downs, everybody. Your contract docs will flow all the way down, and the responsibility flows all the way up. So on that note, and we'll finish this slide and move on to the next piece. You do have to consider in your bidding that there's administration costs that go with this, right? Somebody's gonna have to make sure the contract docs are straight all the way down, make sure the reporting happens all the way up, addressing any of the issues that come up with the review. We're gonna come up with some of the review and talk about what those main components are, but you wanna make sure that in your bid and in your price, your loaded rate, your overhead, you've considered what those administrative costs are gonna be. So I just gave a session a couple weeks ago, and I was like, if you're lucky to have added so many projects, how much back-end staff do you have to handle all those projects? Because we're seeing a lot of administrative people that are very happy to work for you, but they're getting handed lots of projects at a time. So it's the situation that we're in. Make sure you have
And
those
to
costs.
piggyback off your administrative costs, is thinking about as a prime, so your subs really have, they're looking to you, if they're just starting out, looking to you to be able to ask some questions and stuff. So I know when I was a prime, I worked with my subs really closely and, walk through step by step, and really wanted to make sure that they were comfortable doing it. Because at the end of the day, I'm signing off on it as the prime and I'm submitting it to the agency with my signature on it, saying that I've reviewed it, I'm good to go.
Let's actually talk about that more. We're gonna talk about starting work and what happens on the job. And I know you've worked as a prime, and let's cover that part because that's important.
Yes.
What does a contractor expect to see? What should they expect to do when they're working on a prevailing wage job?
So what a contractor should expect to do is, one as a prime, we set up a bulletin board in our yard. So it's gonna include all of the posters that are required. It's gonna have the wage decision. It's gonna have, we do also include all of our sub information. So the employees that are actually working on site have a place to go and they can reference what they should be making. And what, if there's an incident, if they ended up being, because of the 1273 too, which we are talking about with the contractors compliance part of it is making sure that those employees have the references that they need.
It's no secret. It's gonna be posted on site what they should be making.
Yes, and the agency checks your bulletin boards and make sure they have a checklist and they go through and they make sure that everything's sitting there and that it's accessible. That's another thing. It has to be accessible and accessible 24 hours a day.
I just got the recent clarification from the Department of Labor. It has to be readable from like 3 feet away. So it can't be a really small font. You actually have to be able to read it from about this distance. So posters and wages are on site. What is my construction site? What if I'm on a construction project, but I do a lot of my stuff in the fabrication, my own yard?
So on the construction site, they've actually, the final rule came out and had some more discussions on that site of work and what is considered site of work and what is adjacent. So on the site of work is basically what is on the main line and what, and you also, though, they have intersections, sometimes you have that flaggers. So they've started talking about flaggers and truckers. So on the flaggers, if you have an intersection that is maybe a mile down the road and isn't actually on the project, they're still considering that site of work now. Because it's there they're flagging for the project, it's bringing traffic on and off the project. And so that was a change. That was something that they put in writing.
But work done on site for like if I'm a metal fabricator or something?
If you're a metal fab and you're in your shop doing it,
Mhm.
you're gonna be, because you're producing it there and then you're bringing it on site. The moment you set up on site and you install or any of that, then it turns into site of work. Otherwise, your shop is off site.
What else should I expect on site? Record keeping? Should I know who my workers are on site? So one of our contractor fails at the end there.
So your record keeping is big. I've been through many of audits and record keeping, and what saved me, and even as a prime contractor, I went through audits. Having my time cards coded, and especially if you have multiple classifications, you really need to have that documented out. How did you determine? And one of the things that I came across is when we were working on catch basins, and we had multiple contractors working catch basins, but one was union, one was non-union. You had one that was a little bit of both, that had maybe union laborers, but
Right.
not union, but
Not carpenters.
carpenters. So they were using different classifications, and with that, you needed to make sure that if you were gonna not just classify as carpenter and you were using concrete labor and cement mason, how did you determine those hours? So that record keeping on those time cards is real important. And then also daily reports, documenting it and how you came up with it. Having your daily reports. Now, and the new final rule has talked about too, that if you're a sub and you go out and you work and you're only out there one day and it's at the beginning of the project, but the project's 5 years long, you still have to keep records for that one day of work 3 years after the project is done. And so once it's final, it's not 3 years from your work, it's from when the project's done.
Scan them, digital. Otherwise you have boxes and boxes of stuff. But I want to really reiterate some of those things that you said. So one, you have to know who's coming on site. Your daily reports would tell you who's coming on site. You want to know which employees were assigned. Really important for small contractors that maybe are handling multiple jobs at a time and you've got crews moving in the day. You want to know when those crews landed on this particular job, right? So your timesheet and your daily should indicate when they stepped on this particular project. You want to know which workers by name, not just the count. I don't want to know that 8 people were there on this day, but like these 8 people were there, because that information is going to get pushed back to your administrative person who's going to run the payroll, right? And so there should be some record from the field with the names and the hours and the type of work done, so that that matches what's being paid on, on the back office piece. So definitely.
We had, and having to go back, once you get, if you're in an audit and you have to try to back into what you've submitted, it's a paperwork nightmare. If you're staying up front on it, it's so much better. I had on a project where I had to go back, and we had submitted certified payrolls, and all of a sudden it came up like, how did we decide the different work classifications that we're using?
Mhm.
And then going back to a year of paperwork for a DOL audit, it was really time consuming, and some of the records you can't recreate. And if it's not there, it's not there. And then you have to explain to DOL why it's not there. And so these are my lessons learned that, growing up in a 3rd generation contractor.
Yeah, you see a lot in the field, and the documentation is going to help you. ADOT does regular interviews on site though, so you've got to be very aware that we talked about that your employees should know what they're being paid. They should know what their classification is. If they have some sort of say in their timesheet, the best records are those that are employee generated and employee signed in the field. It's going to cover you every time. So if an employee is generating their timesheet and describing what their work is, maybe the piece of equipment they're doing, how much work they got done, that's going to be helpful to you. But ADOT comes out and interviews your workers, right? Tell us how that goes.
Yeah, they come out. It's not if, it's when. And then if you're really fortunate, you'll get the OFCCP out there doing some interviews too.
So ADOT, OFCCP, Department of Labor, yeah, they're going to come visit you.
So with the interviews, it's good to, have a pre-job meeting with your team. We have weekly toolbox topics. I used to have a time where I would tell the guys where to go look for their wages. If they're running a piece of equipment, what does that mean? I went over the wage decision with my employees, so there was no question. Now I've been fortunate to be on ADOT side and doing the interviews and seeing that. So seeing what their criteria is for the classifications and, for the questions that they're asking, it's been very helpful.
So we're going to move into the reporting piece of it, because now you know what the work is. I'm going to very quickly cover the reporting that's required in the regulation, and Cass will cover how it's done at ADOT. So just some of the things that we talked about that are required in the 1273. One, you know that your work is being done out in the field. You want to have good records come into your office so that you can pay them correctly for the work that they've done, at least the wages that they're owed. Now, note that you have to pay weekly on prevailing wage jobs. This is not an exception or an assumption that, hey, I pay biweekly or some of my guys get a monthly invoice. It's not how this works. It's a weekly pay for the work that's performed on site. If you don't pay weekly, then you definitely want to address that with your prime contractor or ask for assistance on how that can happen for your company. Sometimes it's interim checks. You want to have good records of however that's being done. Weekly certified payrolls are required. So per the regulation, a certified payroll is pretty much listing all the workers that we just talked about in the field, what their classifications are, the hours that they worked on this project that we're talking about. And so if you have multiple projects, you're going to have multiple payroll reports for each week, because you're going to put the work that they did on that job for each of those weeks. So all of those will be on there. And then you get the information from their paycheck. And you're going to put that information on there, including any fringe benefits that you're contributing on their behalf and any deductions that you're taking out from their pay. That's a whole other thing. You have to have authorizations to deduct from people's pay. The reason that prevailing wages were put into place was so that people weren't being underpaid for the work that was being performed in that region, right? Geographically, the workers were earning this amount of money, so nobody's being exploited using federal monies. So a prevailing wage is geographically specific. But they also found that they didn't want you to deduct things from their wages, so they make you get a pre-authorization for any deductions. You're gonna report for all workers on your site. We talked about keeping good records, a list by name and timesheets there, so all workers on site. To get credit for your fringe benefits, you want to have on record what that is. It's not good enough to say, well, we give our folks, you know, a couple days off here and there, or the worst one, we're banking their hours for, we're banking their hours for when we're slow. That's not fringe, guys. So let's talk about, you know, you want to get your fringe benefits approved. If you have a formal 401k plan, if you're offering healthcare, you have dental, a pension, those things that you're contributing towards the employee and somebody else is managing that, take credit for that. Take credit for that towards your hourly prevailing wage. Get that submitted so that you can get it approved and you get credit for that. If you do have a formalized apprentice or trainee program, that's also reportable. Apprentices and trainees are the only people that get paid less than the prevailing wages that are listed. And it's based on the schedule that's approved in their training program. So if you have, if you're a company that has several operators, for example, and you have an operator's trainee program or an apprentice program that lets you have an apprentice on site, and you have an apprentice on site, then get credit for that and take that reduced pay that's required there. You'll have to submit, though, evidence that you have an approved apprentice or trainee program. It should include the plan, the details that they're going to learn, the rate scale, any fringe that is owed to the workers, and the ratios. I keep telling people, it's like, we can't have an entire job built with apprentices and trainees, right? That's not how this works. We have craft people that are very competent, that are journey level in their field, that are professionals and technicians. An apprentice isn't a true apprentice coming up and learning in the trade. So there are usually ratios in a program that says for every number of journeymen, you get such number of apprentices. So you want to submit that and get that approved. This is required across all agencies. So whether you're doing work at ADOT, or if you're doing FTA covered work with Valley Metro or FAA covered work over at the airport. These DOL rules and documentations apply across the board. Now, how it gets submitted and monitored is through an electronic system that Cass is going to tell you about. So tell us about LCP Tracker, Cass.
Before I go into LCP Tracker, I wanted to reiterate though, like talking about these bigger projects and stuff, is making sure you're keeping track of your work, your crews based on your contract.
Ooh.
So if you're on a project and and there is multiple subs. So for instance, an example is a joint venture. We have a joint venture and then there's two partners in that joint venture, and the two partners have subs underneath them. Well, those subs are kind of going back and forth. So we could have the same rebar sub between two joint ventures, and then they might have a sub that uses that rebar sub. So you might have 3 contracts on one project. Make sure you're keeping your records according to what contract it is, because that will affect how you're submitting certified payroll. And when the employees get interviewed, the inspector will ask what contract it will be
Oh, this
falling under.
This is not a session on job costing, but that's a really important thing, is be able to track your labor to
Mhm.
specific jobs all the way up. So no, that's a good point. And will they'll submit payroll for each of those contracts?
Correct. Yes. So you could potentially have on this one project one has 4 different contracts. So you have to submit it for it. Keep track and send it each 4 weeks or 4 payrolls in 1 week.
No more hard copy though, all electronic. LCP Tracker, tell us.
All right, LCP Tracker. So being on LCP Tracker and having both sides of the house, being as a contractor and as an ADOT administrator, what we are looking at on the ADOT side is we're gonna, with the e-signature of an authorized person, then, I'm jumping ahead myself.
Okay.
Excuse me, let me pull myself back.
Tell
Okay.
us about the system and then we'll talk about what.
All right, the system. One of the things is in the system is having the e-signature for the authorized person. That's going to be the person that's responsible for submitting this paperwork and having an understanding to where that person that signs it is going to be the one that DOL goes and talks to and asks questions.
So they should have read the 1273.
Yes.
Okay.
And then the next thing is setting up the employee setup. Once you get in, Now, when you're on an ADOT project, ADOT puts the contractor in. So
Okay.
once the sub is approved through field reports, they get loaded up into LSP tracker. There's other projects like down on the border wall where the prime was responsible for putting the contractors in. So it just
Okay.
depends on what the agency's preference. When you get in there into LSP tracker, then you go in and you can set up your employees. I was always the manual time, old school, and the whole uploading thing never worked for me on LSP tracker. So
I think when I talked to LCP, they said about 80% of the contractors that use it manually put it in. So you've got company.
But then if you do upload your payroll, then the employee setup, when you first upload them, will do that. E-documents, that's gonna be a tab where you go and you're gonna upload your apprentice certs if you have apprentices, if you have deductions other than taxes outside, so your other deductions, you're gonna have to submit a wage authorization form or an employee authorization form. They have two different names. ADOT land, we call them EADs, but wage deduction form is another one. And then you have making sure consecutive weeks end dates. So once you pick a weekend date, LSP tracker only knows weekend dates. They don't know what day you start on. They only know what day you end on.
Okay, so if I end on Sundays, everyone should end on, look, my payroll should always end on a Sunday.
Yes.
Okay.
And if it doesn't, it will flag us. Numbering, making sure you're numbering 1 through whatever. Even if you're non-working week, you still have to submit a non-working payroll.
So from the time I start a job, we talked about starting the job, that's my number one. And all the way through finishing the job, I should have some sort of weekly submittal through the system,
Yes.
right? One through final.
Yes. Now, I've seen some where you go and work one day and then you have like 30 non-working because you could potentially go back out, but then if something wasn't needed, so then you would just submit another final, or then you would just say 14 final.
Okay.
Apprentice rates must be requested. So when you have an apprentice, you would, going into eDocs, some of the things that, when you submit your apprentice cert, you're gonna go in and then you're gonna send an email to field, because we're talking ADOT, field reports in their apprentice cert email. They have a specific email for it. You would just send them a request saying, hey, I uploaded so-and-so's cert, and now this has triggered me that I have to ask for apprentice work classification. And so they will check that against the cert.
So some of the things that we're hearing here is that those things that I mentioned that are required by all the regulations have been automated, or at least have an automated system using LCP tracker at ADOT. So
Yes.
that's good. That's good.
Nice. Yes, I have piles and piles. Back in 2012, Patty, I went, when I was closing Bison, I went to my storage and my Connex boxes and pulled out all these boxes, and they were probably 30 feet high in the air that I was shredding from just paper.
We've been there. So good system. It's used mandatory, actually,
Mhm.
mandatory use by ADOT. So when you're on a project, they're gonna set up the job. The wage decision that is in your contract is gonna be loaded in there. Your employees, you can put in one time and then report their hours in there.
Yep.
It will check it against the rates, right? And you said all the documentation that supports that report will be uploaded through eDocs.
Yes.
We talked about fringe a little bit, and then that'll be in there in that system, so you want to get some support to, if you don't understand that.
So when it comes to fringes and then cash in lieu of fringe, if it's a cash fringe, there's a box that you go and you put that information in. But if you have a bona fide fringe plan that you can use of contributions and get credit for it, you can upload, you can either manually put it, or when you're doing the employee setup, there's a fringe area down there in the employee setup to where you can add the employees' fringes, so it comes through every time that you're entering your employees.
And then finally, when we get it all in there and the numbers have all checked out, you go to certify, and that makes it the certified payroll. What are we certifying? It's called a statement of compliance.
A weekly statement of compliance, and it tells you that you're giving up your firstborn.
Let's bring that up. Let's bring that up, because this is essentially what makes it a certified payroll. Otherwise, it's just a payroll
It's
report.
just a payroll.
This is a certified payroll report.
Yes, this one now, this page here is your weekly statement of compliance. This is where you're gonna put what your name is, your title, who the contractor is, what the work is. Now, an LSP tracker, this information's already input,
Mhm.
but this is what it looks like if you have to do paper ones still. And so looking at this is gonna talk about, you know, that you say they're paid weekly, they're being reported weekly. This is also based off the 1273. That's another one, that number will always be anything.
Ingrained in your brain.
Yes. And then it comes down to these lovely boxes, A and B and C. A is gonna be your fringe played into a bona fide plan. So this is the employer contribution on behalf of an employee. So they reap the benefits of it, they just don't see the cash of it.
Okay,
And then B is gonna be the cash. The cash is gonna be the employee gets it, and then the employee can use that for whatever they
Whatever
want
they
for their fringe.
so if I'm contributing as an employer and I have a 401k match, I would mark A.
Yes,
If I'm just paying rate in lieu of- and it met the minimum that was required for fringe, but I'm just paying in a value in cash so they can use it, I would mark B. If I were paying a contribution, but it didn't meet the minimum and I had to pay in cash, do I mark both?
you mark both.
Okay. What's C?
C is an exception. I've used it in the past and I wrote carpenter operators. I don't see a whole lot of Cs.
Mhm.
It's As and Bs.
Okay. Here's my big thing here. The person who signs this is signing that they oversee the payroll, that they understand that they've been paid fully, right? And at the end of the day, is the one who has to answer questions if there's an investigation, right? So this should be somebody with that kind of authority, either an owner and officer or designated person by an owner and officer, correct? Somebody official,
Yes,
not the receptionist. Okay. What else? That's it?
that's it.
Certified payroll? That's the statement of compliance. So that gets submitted, so when you're signing, you're putting in your e-signature, just be very aware that when you're doing that, this is what you're signing. You're submitting it electronically. But until you actually sign that, ADOT doesn't see it, right?
Nope, ADOT doesn't see it until you sign it, it gets submitted, and then at that point, once you certify the payroll, then it comes into ADOT's court.
And then what do you look for?
Then on ADOT's, let me put on my ADOT hat. So when we're checking the payrolls for ADOT, we're looking at the statement of compliance, making sure A or B is checked. We will reject payrolls if they have the wrong box marked. And one of the things is when you're certifying payrolls, we talked about the bona fide fringe plans versus cash. We can see it's one of the things that we have to check. There's a shaded box area for all bona fide fringe plans paid to a third party. So that pops out when we're looking at certified payrolls. So
Okay.
at that point, we know if you have a rate in there, we're gonna be looking for A. And then, if there's nothing in there, then we're gonna be looking for B. And there is, like we talked about, you could do A and B, because if you don't have, for instance, if your fringe plan doesn't cover the full fringe amount that's required,
Mhm.
you can pay the difference in cash. Looking at payroll, so then on the payroll information itself, we check the weekend dates, we're checking the numbers, we're making sure everything's consistent in consecutive order. Pay dates, we look at the pay dates. The pay dates will tell us too, if, when it's coming to bi-weekly, weekly. One of the things is when we look at gross of all projects, if that seems excessive, it might trigger a question. If you see work classifications and pay rates, and there's multiple work classifications, we look at that. It's all about, at the end of the day, it's about the employee getting paid the right rate.
Mhm.
And it's for the benefit of the employees. Sometimes trying to get interviews from the employees, they feel like there might be repercussions or something like that. But at the end of the day, it is in the best interest of the employee.
So you're also looking to make sure that those classifications match the work that the contractor does, right?
Correct.
Right, so it's not like you can use carpenter rates, but you're an ironworker.
Correct.
Okay.
So one of the things is that we have, because you have to submit a contract with every subcontractor. So we have access to see what is that scope of work? What is that subcontractor or prime contractor doing? In our interviews, it's gonna talk about what piece of equipment it is. One of the things that I help with my team is we have pictures of the different pieces of equipment and then tie it to the wage decision. So it's like a quick reference.
Oh, that's handy.
Yes. Apprentice certs. When we go in and we see an apprentice, we will go into eDocs, pull those apprentice certs and make sure whatever is on that apprentice certs matches with on certified payroll. If it says level 2 on the apprentice cert, but it's level 1 on the payroll, it gets kicked back because it's got to match. Another big one that we are looking at, oh, let's go back to apprentice certs. We are able to look and see, let's talk about carpenters and ratios. So one of the things is when you have the carpenter, and it will show on our cert too, a ratio, what is allowed. So carpenters are usually 1-to-1. So your first apprentice would be with 1 journeyman. Your next apprentice, then it goes 3-to-1. So then you would have 3 for another apprentice, you would have to have 3 journeymen. So now you have 2 apprentices and 4 journeymen.
So to have 2 apprentices, there should be at least 6 people on my payroll.
Yes.
Okay.
So those are different things to look at in making sure. I had that happen on a project before where I went back. And then if the ratio is off, then you have to pay, you can only take the amount, and then the other apprentice would get full journeyman, and then trying to figure out which apprentice gets
Right, the
which
full
rate.
journeyman rate.
Yeah.
So if you're not paying them correctly, at any scenario, if you're not paying correctly and you're found not paying correctly, you will have to pay the worker that restitution, right, is what it's called.
Restitution,
You'll pay the restitution. So in the case of the 2 apprentices, if it's not following the ratio, one is gonna have to be paid at full journey level rates, and the other one is going to be quite angry about it.
And then other deductions. The moment, when we see other deductions on the certified payrolls, it triggers us. There's got to be a note, and your other deduction note needs to be specific on what the other deduction is. Trying to figure out like a lump sum, because all it is a lump sum. That triggers us to look at the notes, and then triggers us to go back to eDocs and see if that employee authorization deduction form is in there, the EAD.
So they have to pre-approve those generally. If you're gonna take money out of an employee's check, they're pre-approving. There's some sort of documentation. My favorite is always the garnishments. I have employees go, well, I didn't approve that. The court just said they are to take the money. Some agencies don't take a garnishment order. We take it as evidence that there's approval for a deduction if the employer has that, but you've got to see what your agency requires. Right?
Yes, it depends on the agency. At ADOT, the court order documents can be uploaded, but they need to be blacked out. All of the
Personal information aside from what we need,
yeah,
blacked out. Okay.
Birthdays, social security, addresses, that stuff. Some of the
Other red flags you're seeing when ADOT looks at this?
other red flags, like I said, talked about earlier, bi-weekly. Bi-weekly because depending on, you can check it by check dates, check numbers, excessive all projects, kind of, you just kind of get a feel for it, multiple classifications, making sure, that it's seen that they are being classified correctly, their wages are being addressed correctly. And we already talked about the excessive gross wages, those have been.
So the ADOT review is to ensure that the rules are being followed, so that the certified payroll is accurate as best they can tell as an agency for the work that's happening in the field, and that any issues related to Davis-Bacon related acts are addressed before they have to tell FHWA, Department of Labor, or anybody else. So they're doing their due diligence to make sure that the information that is coming in on a project is correct. Because at the end of the day, we don't want to end a job where people are owed money, or, there are workers that are, haven't been paid correctly, or, just any disputes and discrepancies related to labor. It's very important to stay ahead of it. So they review daily. From I seen Cass's team, they're reviewing payroll on a daily basis, and I'm sure other ADOT offices will do that. But how do they enforce what they find?
So the ADOT has taken and put in enforcement the ability to where now 1273, you have to submit your payroll, you have to pay weekly, and you have to submit payrolls weekly by the 1273. ADOT to enforce that has it done it now where you look at the specs that by the 15th of the following month, so we're now in November, so by the 15th of December,
Mhm.
all of November's payrolls need to be put in. And if that doesn't happen, then we're able to write a letter to the contractor stating these are all the missing, inaccurate or incomplete payrolls. And you have 10 days from that letter to get your corrections in the missing payrolls. If it doesn't get in within 10 days, then we have the ability to withhold $2,500 per payroll per contractor until it gets cleared up and submitted.
So let's pause right there for a minute, right? Let's talk about timeline. So you're working in the field, you got good records there. Then you pay the workers the following week. Then you get a payroll, weekly certified payroll submitted, after you've done that within a few days, no later than a week, that you're going to issue and submit a certified payroll. ADOT's reviewing them. So there's that time that's needed for review. They get a full month's in. Doesn't mean they're looking at the full month and in those 10 days. They've been reviewing overly, but they've got 10 days to do a full assessment of where you are, right?
Yes.
So that's what you get notified on the 15th. And you have time to fix those things. Don't wait for that moment to
No.
fix things, but you have time to fix those things between the 15th plus your 10 days, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So with that, one of the things is being on a regular project, size project versus a mega project. You might have anywhere from 5 subcontractors to maybe at most 20. But on these bigger mega projects, I think we had over 400 submitting on South Mountain. We have close to 200 on Broadway, and then we have 150 or 70 on 17. So that 10 days, if not staying on top of it, can really come and catch up on you. So some of the practices that I've put in place is being able to, at the beginning of the month, doing a quick review through LCB Tracker to see where my subs are.
Mhm.
And if what's coming at me, what the freight train looks like coming at me by the 15th.
No, that's very important, because not only are our contractors busy and their administrative back-end office administration may be overloaded, the people that are receiving those documents are also busy. And so it's a very specific process, because they're dealing with a lot of contractors. So it's not just your payroll, right? It's not just, but I have to hand it off to your team and every person that I've seen at ADOT being very helpful to contractors that call in. But because there are so many, you rely on prime contractors to also provide that assistance to their subs, correct?
Correct.
Understanding the system. How can a prime contractor help its sub submit correctly or fix their issues?
Being out, having a good understanding, you might not know the ins and outs of what that sub is doing, but all payroll is gonna be entered the same. So having a good understanding of what LCB Tracker looks like, being able to give them direction, making sure that you understand that wage decision and prep yourself before going into that project, reviewing the wage decision, getting your head wrapped around, what other classifications have you seen, and knowing what your sub's work is. Maybe that, looking and having that work classification and knowing that there could be a conformance request. I'm not saying to go ahead and submit the conformance request, but to alert them that it might be. If not, remember, first come, first serve.
Right.
So we had an incident where a conformance request got submitted, and it was a higher rate because it was a contractor that had its own rates that got submitted. And then another sub came in and was a small mom and pop company and ended up having to pay the higher rates because
That's expensive.
Yes.
Look at your contracts, get your requests in early, especially if you're a small sub or you're a specialty sub. You want to make sure that those rates aren't determined without your
Yes.
input.
Now, one of the things is if you get it done within 10 days, then the $2,500 gets returned. It gets released. But if after 90 days, it still has not been rectified and resolved, then ADOT has the ability to withhold $500 in LDs and penalties.
Still have to fix it.
You still have to fix it.
And they keep $500.
Yes.
Okay.
So, and then at that point, then you would get $2,000 back, but they keep $500.
It's been interesting. It happens and it flows down. So if you're the cause, if you're a subcontractor causing the prime contractor to get hit with a $2,500 payment, expect to hear about it.
Yes. Well, it will hold up your payment also.
Yeah, they're gonna get it somehow. You wanna make sure that it gets corrected. So prime contractors are also working with their subs to avoid this situation, because they get that letter. It has all the subcontractors that are missing payroll, that have submitted incorrect payroll. And so they see the full implication of the damages that are gonna be applied if it doesn't get fixed. So please be responsive in getting that fixed.
Yes, and at the end of the day, the prime ends up ultimately, the money's being withheld from the prime. If a DOL comes and does an audit on a sub, the prime's right there next to the sub in that audit. They are, there's been multiple times that we had audits that I went to every single one of my subs audits on the project.
Well, we could talk about, you can talk to Cass separately about audits and DOL audits. Hopefully you never have to go through one. It's a very intensive process. Department of Labor not only looks at the Davis-Bacon requirements that are on a project, they also look at the full federal labor standards, and that's where they find most of their violations. Some of the things that we talked about here, record keeping, timekeeping, paying your employees correctly, can save you on that federal labor standards review. That doesn't necessarily, it's not the same as the Davis-Bacon piece, right? So we've got some Davis-Bacon components, but DOL, when they go in for an audit, they're looking at the employer as a whole. And is that employer meeting the federal labor standards requirements that come with federally funded projects? So keep that in mind. Set yourself up for success by having good records and setting up good processes. But here's the fun part. We've been around this for a very long time, and we talked about ending on a happy note. We're going to go through a list of contractor fails, things that we've seen on the job. Don't let this be you. We've heard them all.
And this is where I tell Kaylee to push in. No.
No. So I'll let you think about it. You want to start, or you want me to start?
You start.
Okay, so paying cash, number 4 on the list, paying cash, right? So one of the things that we've noticed is that if you're an employer, so everybody's got different systems that impact how they're operating. But if you're paying people in cash, you need to have some sort of record that that person received their money. Or else if you get audited, expect to have to pay it again. One, have to expect to find that worker again and to pay them again. So if you're paying in cash, get a signed receipt, get a signature from the employee. I would take their picture at this point because we've
I
got
would
to
take a picture holding the
cash,
cash.
right? Some sort of record that says that they got their money. Yeah, definitely that one, paying in cash.
I would go missing workers, because when you leave a worker off your payroll and you're not putting them on, then you have to put them on the payrolls and then provide all the documentation, your time card, proof of payment, and a diary.
Oh, geez. Wrong classification. I'm gonna do wrong classification. So I honestly walked onto a job site. We were responsible for the interviews on that job site. And the supervisor on the job site was like, well, he goes, we're all carpenters, but not that guy because he's not worth that money. So he was calling him something else on his payroll. Wrong classification. If they're doing the work of a classification, they're paid that classification and that rate regardless of their skill level. So that one was funny. What else? Overtime? These happen for real. Overtime, we're gonna get to the questions here in a minute. Overtime is another one we see with contractors, especially around the holidays, and especially when you got weather delays or something like that. You've got some employers trying to bank hours, so you get a really busy week, and then they want to bank the hours for over Christmas break, let's say, or over the holiday. You can't do that. You got to pay the worker for every hour that they worked for the week that they worked it. So just be very aware of that. And if they earn the overtime in those weeks, you're going to pay it in those weeks.
Yes. Oh, I want to say shift work, but I don't have it in me today.
Shift work?
Because this has been brought up, if you're working nights and you're going into days and trying to break up that shift.
Just pick a day. If you're starting on a day and that's the start of your day, or if you're ending on the day and that's the day that you're reporting, let's say, so maybe it's when you sign, if you had to sign your signature, that date that you signed is the morning of, but pick the day that shift is going to show up on the, and yes, be consistent. Not paying weekly. We've seen that a lot. We get told this a lot.
Well, no, and then recently it's, well, we're paying bi-weekly, but we only have to report weekly. No, you have to pay weekly and report weekly. I wish it said and or if.
Right, it doesn't. Oh, no employee records. I have this all the time. They're like, but he's not even my employee. because they're using 1099s, they've borrowed people from another company. It's like, we don't know his name, address, social security number, he's not even our worker. If he's working on your site for your business, on your behalf, then you have to have some sort of record of that person and the time and wages paid to him.
Yes, and being on a federal aid project, you have to do the I-9, so you have to have that marked, and so you have to have some record of the employee working for you.
Well, but you know, with small businesses, sometimes you're looking for craft that's available. Somebody's got somebody available, right? We've seen borrow. You want to have some sort of record in place of if you're borrowing employees, that you're paying them, that you've run the 1099. We've seen workers that will show up on a separate company, for example. Have a good enough relationship if you are having to borrow crew sometimes from a contractor. If you're a DBE firm, then you would definitely want to have them on your payroll.
Yes.
But we see this happen a lot in industry.
Oh, really quick, before we go to Q&A. Number 10, undisclosed subcontractor.
Oh, that.
Yes.
Okay.
So on that, you want to make sure, especially if the employee gets interviewed and they say they work for you, but they don't show up on their payroll. If you're using a temp agency to provide temporary labor, they are a subcontractor that then they would need to submit their own payroll. So what we've come across, I've done it both as a contractor and on agency, is when we get an interview and then all of a sudden the employee doesn't exist, it's not part of that subcontractor that they said they worked for, and it turns out that they were part of an agency, then not only did they not report payrolls, but then they can get the contractor then gets penalties for a non-approved subcontractor on site. So that is something really understanding who is on site and who your subcontractors are.
Last one before questions, per diem and subsistence, because we do have to travel workers a lot of times for highway jobs. Just be very aware. We had one particular employer that was charging his employees rent. We talked about authorized deductions, right? He was in charge, he had a house near the location, he was charging his employees rent. Under Department of Labor investigation, the questions came up as to whether or not the employees knew they were gonna have to travel. So were they hired before the travel or for a traveling job? And whether or not certain benefits and charges were to the employer's benefit or to the employee's benefit. So if you're looking at per diem and subsistence payments or deductions, you definitely want to get a clearer understanding of what Department of Labor is going to allow on that. So with that, we see one question in the chat, and that's for where do we find apprentice ratios?
So when you look at your apprentice certs, if it's coming from the register of labor,
The registered apprentice program?
if it's coming from there on the
Woody.
Witty.
His name is Woody.
Witty. When you look at the cert itself, up in the area, it will say ratio and it will list on it. If it's a trainee program from a company, it will be listed within their certificate. So it's actually on the certificate. It is not on the registered electronic signature page, the DOO page, but it is on the state registration.
Okay. Any other questions? Just approved. Thanks. We have fans in the audience. This is like fun with flags, Davis Bacon style.
Episode 2.
Just comments saying good job.
So no,
Oh,
since
see,
we're
look at us.
here, we have no questions. Other contractor fails. Seriously, the one, honestly, he was like, he's not worth that amount of money. It's not how this works. We did have a contractor, it was a staffing company that was paying their employees in a voucher to the convenient liquor store next to the staffing company's office. That's a no-go.
I'm gonna find that employer.
He was literally paying them in vouchers. That's not how this works. What else?
You didn't talk about ghost labor.
Ghost laborers. Oh, when we go out to the job site and you see that there's 24 people out on site and then there's only 12 on the payroll, that's happened. Usually an interview will help that. Dailies help that. That's when we start finding that there were undisclosed subcontractors or they're not my people. You want to make sure your superintendents, supervisors in the field know these same rules and that they've got good records. unpaid wages, misused OJTs. Okay, investigations of unpaid wages. So if there is a point, and I'd like to hear from you, Ben, because you have the official language in here. So if most of the investigations were unpaid wages, we talked about Department of Labor coming on to a project, doing the investigation. If there weren't adequate records or proof that the employees were paid the actual wages reported, that definitely is going to be an unpaid wages finding. The employer is going to be responsible for paying the unpaid wages owed to the worker. They may also be responsible to pay any liquidated damages owed to or collected by the agency or Department of Labor. Misuse OJTs. So we have a saying here, there's no such thing as a helper. I think there's like one classification in all the wage decisions that actually has that as a classification. Just assume that it does not exist. If you are using a trainee or a helper or an apprentice, they have to be in a bona fide program. So it's not like you can just say, we see this in the summer a lot. Let's talk about Phoenix, Arizona in the summer times. We build year round. We get a lot of employees' kids on the
Yeah.
job site, right? The 18-year-old who doesn't have a purpose yet usually ends up on the job site. They cannot be paid as an apprentice, a trainee, or anything like that, less than the work. If they're doing carpenter work, they're paid carpenter's rates. So be very clear on that.
Well, if you are a contractor though, and you're working on ADOT and you're doing federally assisted, you can get on BECO's website, they have templates for
Training program?
training programs for company sponsored. So, the apprenticeship goes through the register of laborers, but as a contractor and you just want to have your own in-house, there are templates on their website for you to be able to look at.
I'm glad you said that because I get questions. A lot of contractors will say, well, we don't have an apprentice program because we're not union. And what you're saying is through ADOT's website, you can actually see a template and get your own training program registered and approved for an official training program. But it has criteria. There's a layout, right? It shows how this person is going to reach jury level status in the craft. So definitely look into that. Next question, does the phone number and email requirements start now? Do current jobs have to change? Current jobs have a change order in them or just future projects? So we're going to talk about that from what we understand, and we've not seen anything official come out in writing. Now, the phone number and email requirements start with the new jobs. The only thing that we are expecting to see change orders about are, and then it kind of listed all the rules and how this change is going to impact contractors. The only thing we expect to see a change order on is the application of new wage decisions for long-term projects or projects with a substantial change. So that clause might get sent to you, even if there's not a new wage decision. That was the one exception that was pretty much across the board. We started looking at agencies and projects, was that clause is likely going to come out because that could apply if there are significant changes to existing contracts. The record keeping, phone number and email requirements start with your new projects. So everything else is going to start with the new projects.
Well, it won't come to say that if you and I'm not sure how this is gonna work because we haven't had official conversations about it, but I know when it came to when I-9, checking the box for I-9 became mandated, it then affected even my current project because I would have to go into that employee and check it. So that potentially could happen on the contractor side, that if they implement it, they flip a switch, you're gonna have to go into the employee's records and put that information in.
So that's really important, right? Because we're talking about when do the rules apply and how does it get applied? That's what we just mentioned here about new contracts. But if ADOT in its reporting system flips that switch and it turns on everything, you might have to watch for that.
The train decides to hit.
Stay tuned for that one. So let's see, do we have any more questions? There's some information in the chat about FHWA approved training programs that are available. I would recommend that you look into that. Workforce development is a definite need in our industry. So if you are making that effort to train your employees, your craft, your crew, get credit for it. Formalize the program, get it approved by ADOT's, the BECO office, get it approved based on the FHWA standards, and then you can use those ratios and actually train your employees. Not all of them. I mean, it's not like you can't build a whole project you can't build a whole project with trainees, right? So you definitely want to get that approved and start building your crafted crew internally. Ben, we're gonna have to meet you. The workforce development piece, we have to work behind it. We see as an agency, as an industry in our agencies with our contractors that we're having to attract craft and crew and make construction popular again. We love it, but we need more people to love it. To spend the time in training, we've got a different kind of workforce now in terms of expectations. We are still very excited about the type of work that we do. I mean, you're 35 years in the industry. I'm 20 something years in the industry. I don't know how long.
I know, I've been doing it since I was 13. It's crazy.
Right. We got to get more people involved in the construction industry. For those of you that are contractors that have these projects that are federally funded, just know that the prevailing wage requirement is going to be in there, especially most of the ADOT jobs are funded with some sort of federal funds. So it's going to be in there. Understand it so that you can approach it knowledgeably, understand it so that you can approach the pricing correctly. Know what your administrative requirements are going to be, ask for help, know what you can ask for, understand how things are monitored on this end so that you can be timely and responsive. You've got a team on the ADOT side that is reviewing all the payrolls for all the subs and trying to get it all out in a matter of days. So if you can have your team be timely, look for assistance where necessary. So if you can get prime contractor assistance to help you clarify maybe some procedures, examples of documentation. If your back end isn't fully formed with the forms that are needed, ADOT has all the forms available.
Yep.
So use those templates and just start the project on the right foot so that when you hit the interview, and hopefully you never see a DOL audit, but you could, get ready for it.
And to close, right now we're in the middle of a survey for heavy and for highway. DOL is performing. Why is this important? This is how we get our voice, our industry's voice into our wage decisions. And right now it's online, and the construction time frame is going to be any projects from October 1st, 2022 till December 29th, 2023. Doesn't matter if you worked 1 day or 100 days.
So if you worked on an ADOT highway job,
Any
highway job,
highway job, any state job in Arizona, if you worked on it, include it. It's going to ask you if it's Davis-Bacon or non-federal. So the questions are out there, but the cutoff for this information is January 15th of 2024. So they're collecting all the information. The link to the survey is included on the slides, and also I also included some links to ADOT's field report certified payrolls. If you have any questions at all, Patty and I are always here. We're giving that handout a quick glance to be able to look in stuff.
it has our contact info on it. Right, so Rebecca will send that out. It's just a real quick reference sheet as to what your requirements are. Has our contact info on there. But very important, be a part of the survey, because that's what impacts the prevailing wages for the region, right? So it asks you where you work, asks the type of work, the classifications that you use, whether you're union, non-union. So it's very important that it capture that information so we got better rates that reflect our marketplace.
Yes, and that's what part of the final rule talked about, how they were going to change some of the stuff for the survey. So. All right, then.
We'll hang here until we see you all leave, or if there's any more questions. What job is the photo? Our PowerPoint technician over here picked a great highway photo. I don't know.
It's somewhere up to 17.
It's on the 17th. Might be your job.
Okay, Patty, Cassandra, I don't see any more questions coming in. So on behalf of all the attendees and consultants, thank you so much for putting this together. This was really fun. Your energy is fantastic and the information is absolutely outstanding. So thank you so much. We will get the recording and the handout and the slide deck out to everybody. Give us just a few hours, maybe even by the end of the day, and you should see that come out to everybody who registered for the workshop. So thank you so much again for spending some of your Wednesday morning with us. Talk to you soon.
Bye, thank you.